Hey everyone, welcome to Conflict Tales. Get ready for another unbelievable story filled with drama and unexpected twists. The city has officially declared that my store must be demolished due to new zoning regulations. But I know exactly who's behind this: the Homeowner Association, and more specifically, their ruthless leader, Karen Winslow. When I first moved into this neighborhood, I thought I had finally found a place where I could settle down. I had been running my small hardware store for over 10 years, serving the community, helping neighbors fix their homes, and providing them with anything from nails to paint. The store wasn't just my business, it was a part of the neighborhood's identity. But now, according to the Homeowner Association, it's an eyesore and not in line with the neighborhood's aesthetic values. It all started a few weeks after I moved into my new home, just a few blocks away from the store. Karen Winslow, the self-proclaimed queen of the Homeowner Association, approached me during a community meeting. She was all smiles, pretending to welcome me to the neighborhood. "Danny, we're so glad to have you here. We just want to make sure everyone in this lovely community follows the same standards," she said, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. Then she handed me a thick stack of documents. "Just some minor agreements you'll need to sign, ensuring your property maintains the charm of our neighborhood." I glanced through the papers, and my stomach twisted. Buried in the fine print was a clause stating that all commercial properties within the neighborhood limits were subject to Homeowner Association approval. In other words, they could force me to close my store at any time. I refused to sign it, handing the papers back to Karen. Her fake smile flickered for just a second before she laughed. "Oh, Danny, I'm sure you'll change your mind once you see how things work around here." That was the first warning sign. A week later, I received my first violation notice in the mail. Apparently, my front yard had unauthorized decor, a small wooden sign with my store's name on it, something that had been there for years without issue. Then came the fines. At first, they were small, $50 here, $100 there, but they escalated quickly. Suddenly, I was being fined for excessive dust on my driveway, non-uniform paint color on the store's exterior, and failure to meet the community's noise regulations. Mind you, my store wasn't even in a residential zone. When I confronted Karen about the fines, she gave me that same fake, patronizing smile. "It's nothing personal, Danny. We're just trying to keep the neighborhood's standards high. You understand, right?" Her tone made it clear. This was absolutely personal. Things took a darker turn when a city inspector showed up at my store unannounced. He walked through the aisles, poked at the shelves, and scribbled something on his clipboard. "Looks like you have a zoning violation," he finally announced. "This store isn't compliant with the new city ordinances. You'll need to shut it down or face legal action." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just a coincidence. Karen and her Homeowner Association goons were pulling strings behind the scenes, manipulating local government officials to get me out. When I pressed the inspector for details, he shrugged. "I don't make the rules, Mr. O'Connor. I just enforce them." That night I sat at my dining table staring at the pile of fines and violation notices stacked in front of me. Linda, my wife, walked in and placed a cup of coffee beside me. "They're trying to break you, Danny. They want you to give up." I exhaled slowly. Then they picked the wrong guy. The next morning, I walked into City Hall, determined to fight back. But as soon as I stepped into the office, I saw Karen chatting with the zoning commissioner like they were old friends. She turned to me with a smirk. "Danny, so nice to see you here. I hope you're not thinking of making this more difficult than it needs to be." I clenched my jaw. "I'm not going down without a fight, Karen." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes darkened. "Oh, Danny, it's not about fighting. It's about knowing when you've already lost." I didn't reply, but I knew this battle had just begun. Over the next few days, things escalated even further. I started receiving anonymous letters in my mailbox warning me to reconsider my position. My store's security cameras caught someone vandalizing my shop in the middle of the night, but the police dismissed it as random mischief. Then my suppliers started pulling out. Suddenly, the companies I had been working with for years stopped returning my calls. Coincidence? I doubted it. I reached out to an old friend, Richard Wong, an attorney who specialized in property disputes. He reviewed the violation notices and zoning claims and shook his head. "This is deliberate harassment, Danny. They're manufacturing reasons to get you out, but they can't make you leave unless they have a legal basis." "And what if they create one?" I asked. Richard sighed. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of." I spent the next week documenting every fine, every notice, every suspicious event. I installed additional security cameras, reached out to local journalists, and even tried to rally support from my neighbors. But Karen had her hooks deep in this community. Most people were either too afraid to stand up to her or outright supported her vision of improving the neighborhood. My wife worried about the stress eating away at me, but I couldn't back down. This was my business, my livelihood, and I wasn't going to let a group of power-hungry bureaucrats take it away from me. Then came the final blow. A formal letter from the city arrived, stamped with the mayor's office seal. It declared that my store's land was to be redeveloped for urban enhancement. The legal jargon boiled down to one thing: they were forcing me out. The war had just started and I was running out of time. The morning after receiving the city's official redevelopment notice, I woke up to find a "For Sale" sign staked into my front yard. My stomach twisted. I hadn't put it there. Someone was sending a message. I yanked it out of the ground and threw it into the trash, but the tension in my chest didn't ease. If they thought I would fold that easily, they had another thing coming. Linda was already in the kitchen, her arms crossed as she scrolled through her phone. "Danny, you need to see this," she said, her voice tight. She turned the screen toward me. There was an article in the local news site. "Neighborhood celebrates upcoming redevelopment. Homeowner Association and city officials plan exciting changes." Beneath the headline was a picture of Karen Winslow, grinning like a queen on her throne. I felt heat rise to my face as I read further. The article made it sound like the entire community was thrilled about the changes, that everyone was on board with the Homeowner Association's vision for modernizing the area. They had already written me off, treating my business like it was a done deal. They hadn't even waited for me to fight back. "They're controlling the narrative," I muttered. "They want people to think this is inevitable." Linda placed a hand on my arm. "You need a counter-move. You can't just sit here waiting for them to steamroll you." She was right. I grabbed my phone and called Richard Wong, my attorney. "Richard, we need to stop this. The city is acting like my store is already gone." His voice was measured, but I could hear the concern underneath. "Danny, they're using every legal loophole they can find. I looked into it. The redevelopment order was expedited. Usually, these things take months of hearings and proposals. This one was pushed through in record time. Someone pulled serious strings. How do we fight it? We need to slow them down. Challenge every violation, appeal every fine. If they want a fight, we make it a long, expensive one. But I won't lie to you, Danny. They have resources, and they'll play dirty." That was becoming clearer by the day. When I arrived at my store that morning, I saw 2 uniformed city inspectors waiting outside. One of them was holding a clipboard, the other was taking pictures of the storefront. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice even. The older inspector, a man with wire-rimmed glasses, barely glanced at me. "Routine inspection. We received complaints about safety hazards. Just doing our job." Funny how these complaints started the moment the Homeowner Association decided they wanted me gone, I said, crossing my arms. The second inspector, a younger guy, shifted uncomfortably. "We don't make the rules, sir. We just enforce them." I clenched my jaw as they walked inside. Over the next hour, they nitpicked every detail. The wiring was outdated, the shelves were unstable, the back storage area was overcrowded. By the time they were done, they had a full list of violations and a warning that I had 2 weeks to address them or face closure. Karen was behind this. I knew it. She was too calculated, too efficient. She wasn't waiting for me to fold. She was making sure I had no choice. That night, I met with Richard and a few trusted neighbors at my house. Berta, my elderly neighbor, was the first to speak. "They did the same thing to Frank's Diner last year. He fought for months, but the fines just kept coming. Eventually, he had to sell. Richard nodded grimly. They want you to drown in bureaucracy, Danny. Even if you win one battle, they'll just create another. We need to hit them where it hurts. How? I asked. He slid a folder across the table. Karen's financials. I found some irregularities. She's not just enforcing Homeowner Association rules, she's profiting from them. If we can prove she's personally benefiting from these redevelopment projects, we might have a way to take her down. Linda leaned forward. You mean we can expose her? Make the city see she's not just helping the community, but lining her own pockets? Exactly, Richard said, but we need hard proof. I exhaled. Then we get it. I knew this wasn't just about my store anymore. This was about taking back control. If they wanted a war, they were about to get one. The next morning, I took a drive around the neighborhood. The transformation was happening faster than I had realized. Old mom-and-pop shops were either boarded up or replaced with sleek, modern storefronts, the kind that screamed overpriced coffee and high-end boutiques. I stopped at what used to be a bakery, now an upscale wine bar with tinted windows. Inside, I could see a crowd of well-dressed patrons sipping expensive drinks, oblivious to the destruction their progress had caused. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You should reconsider. It's not too late to take the offer. Some fights aren't worth it. I gripped the wheel. They were getting bolder. But if they thought intimidation would work, they didn't know me at all. The text message had been sitting in my phone's inbox all morning, and no matter how many times I reread it, my stomach churned the same way. You should reconsider. It's not too late to take the offer. Some fights aren't worth it. There was no name, no signature, just that ominous little warning. The coward hadn't even bothered to block their number. It was intimidation, plain and simple, and I wasn't biting. By noon, Richard called. Danny, you need to be careful. Whoever sent that message isn't just bluffing. I ran some checks, and the redevelopment contracts tied to your area? They're linked to a holding company that Karen has stakes in. She's set to make a fortune once your shop is gone. She's not just pushing this as the Homeowner Association president. She's got money in the game. I exhaled sharply, gripping the phone. So what you're telling me is this isn't about community standards. It's about Karen cashing out. Exactly. And she's not the only one. Some city officials have their hands in this too. This whole project is being fast-tracked because they want it done before the next election cycle. If we don't slow them down, you're going to be steamrolled. Linda overheard the conversation and crossed her arms as soon as I hung up. Danny, if they're this deep in it, what's stopping them from just making up a reason to shut you down? Nothing, I admitted. But if I let them win, I lose everything. That afternoon, I went back to my store, only to find a notice of non-compliance taped to the front door. My hands clenched as I read through the violations. According to the city, my building now had structural hazards, unsanitary conditions, and excessive wear that compromises public safety. I knew for a fact none of that was true, but it was the nail in the coffin they were trying to hammer in. The warning at the bottom made my blood boil. Failure to rectify these issues within 10 days will result in forced closure. Karen wanted a war? She was going to get one. I called Richard again and told him what happened. He sighed. They're ramping up the pressure, but if you challenge these citations, they'll be forced to inspect the property properly. We just need a third-party inspector to prove they're lying. And if they block it, then we take it to the press. The next morning, I had a private inspector walk through the store. The guy, a gruff contractor named Wallace, whistled as he looked over the city's violations. "This is crap," he muttered. "I've seen condemned buildings in better shape than this so-called redevelopment project. Someone's making stuff up." He signed off on a full report. "This should be enough to prove there's no real violation here. But I'll be honest with you, Danny. I've seen fights like this before. They don't play fair." 2 days later, the city rejected the report. The reason? Independent inspections do not override municipal citations. That was when I knew this wasn't just about paperwork. It was about keeping me tied up long enough to exhaust me into submission. The night after the rejection, I heard noises outside my house. When I looked through the window, my heart pounded. Someone had dumped garbage all over my front yard. Linda pulled back the curtain beside me and let out a frustrated breath. They're getting desperate. The next morning, a breaking news article hit the local paper. Community leader faces eviction. Homeowner Association and city crackdown on non-compliant business owner. There was my name, right under a photo of Karen smiling like she had already won. I stormed into Richard's office. "We take this to the press, the real press." He nodded. "Time to make them regret pushing you." That same afternoon, I contacted an old friend from my college days, Alex Carter, a journalist with a reputation for digging deep. When I told him everything that had happened, he let out a low whistle. "Danny, this is corruption at its finest. If we expose this, Karen and her people won't just lose credibility, they'll be facing legal trouble." "That's the plan," I said, "but they won't go down easy." Alex agreed to start his own investigation. Meanwhile, Richard filed a formal request to delay the city's closure order. We had to buy time. That night, another text message arrived. "Last warning. Walk away while you can." I refused to respond. I refused to back down. If they thought they could intimidate me, they had another thing coming. This wasn't just about my store anymore. This was about showing them that not everyone could be bullied into silence, and I was ready to fight until the bitter end. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind raced through every possible move the Homeowner Association might try next. The garbage in my yard, the warnings, the constant pressure. It was clear they were trying to wear me down. But they didn't know me well enough. I wasn't built to break. By sunrise, I was already at the shop, going over Wallace's inspection report one more time. The city had rejected it, but that didn't mean it was useless. If I could get a news outlet to cover this, public pressure could force them to reconsider. I needed to make the city look like the villains they were. Alex called just as I was opening the store. "Danny, I've been digging. I found something you're going to want to see. Meet me in an hour." I locked the door and drove to a quiet diner on the other side of town. Alex was already there, sipping coffee and flipping through a thick folder. "You were right," he said, pushing it toward me. "Karen's more than just a figurehead. She's tied to multiple real estate projects across the city. She's been using the Homeowner Association to force out small businesses and homeowners, then flipping the properties through a network of shell companies. And get this, she's connected to the mayor's office." My grip tightened on the papers. "So it's bigger than just my store. Much bigger. And here's where it gets interesting. She's sloppy. Some of these transactions don't add up. Money disappearing, properties sold under the table, zoning changes happening overnight. If we can tie her directly to fraud, she won't just lose her position. She could face criminal charges." I took a deep breath, my mind racing with possibilities. "How do we get this out there?" Alex leaned back. "We go public, not just with your story, but with everything. We don't just expose the Homeowner Association, we expose the corruption behind it. But that means you need to be ready for what comes next. If Karen's willing to break the law to get what she wants, she won't just roll over and admit defeat." I knew he was right. This wasn't just a fight for my store anymore. It was about taking down an entire corrupt system. But I was ready. By the time I got back to my shop, a small crowd had gathered outside. I recognized some of my regular customers, a few other small business owners from the area. One of them, an elderly man named Joe, stepped forward. "We saw the article. We know what's happening. You're not alone in this." A lump formed in my throat. I'd been so focused on fighting back that I hadn't stopped to think about how many people were watching, how many others were just as sick of the Homeowner Association's tactics. "Thank you," I said, "but this isn't over yet." That night I got another text. "You've made your choice. Now deal with the consequences." I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. They were scared. Good. That meant I was doing something right. But now I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. The next morning, I noticed my store's parking lot had been vandalized. Someone had spray-painted "Get Out" in red across the pavement. Linda found me scrubbing at it with a bucket of water, her face lined with worry. "Danny, this is escalating. We need to call the police." I shook my head. "They won't do anything. They'll just take a report and tell us to be careful. We have to handle this differently." She hesitated before nodding. "Then what's the plan?" "We go bigger. We bring more people in. We make this a public fight they can't ignore." Alex had already started drafting an exposé, but we needed more traction. I reached out to local news stations, business owners who had been pushed out before me, even community groups tired of the Homeowner Association's overreach. If enough people spoke out, we could make this too big for them to sweep under the rug. By the end of the week, our movement had grown. More people were coming forward, sharing their own horror stories about how the Homeowner Association had destroyed their livelihoods, pressured them into selling, or drowned them in legal fees. Karen's pristine reputation was starting to crack, but she wasn't giving up either. Flyers started appearing around the neighborhood accusing me of endangering the community and bringing in crime. Then came the legal threats. An official letter from a high-priced law firm landed in my mailbox, warning me that my slanderous claims would have consequences. Linda read it over my shoulder and clenched her fists. "They're trying to scare you," I exhaled, folding the letter and tossing it aside. "They're trying, but they haven't won yet." The final straw came when someone tried to sabotage my store's electrical system. The lights flickered, machines cut out, and by the time I realized what was happening, half my inventory was ruined from power surges. I called Richard immediately, and he showed up with a grim look. "This is destruction of property, Danny. We can file charges. And if they sweep it under the rug like everything else, then we take this higher. We go after the mayor next. If Karen's connected to him, then he has a stake in keeping this quiet. We make enough noise and they won't be able to silence us." I clenched my fists, staring at the wreckage of my shop. They wanted me to break, but I was just getting started. The morning after the power sabotage, I stood in the middle of my store, staring at the damage. Machines were fried, shelves were knocked over, and half my refrigerated stock was ruined. It wasn't just about the financial hit. I knew exactly what this was. A message. They were trying to tell me that no matter how hard I fought, they would always be a step ahead. But if they thought I was about to roll over and accept defeat, they had another thing coming. Richard showed up less than an hour later. He didn't even need me to explain. One look around, and he let out a long breath. "This isn't random vandalism. This is targeted. We have enough here to escalate legally. We can file charges. Take this higher." I ran a hand through my hair, frustrated. "And if the cops ignore it like last time? Karen has too many people in her pocket. We need something stronger." Richard hesitated before nodding. "Then we need leverage. Real leverage." That night, I met with Alex in the back of the diner, away from prying eyes. He slid a USB drive across the table. "This is it. Bank records, emails, proof of property transfers. Karen and her network are deeper in this than we thought. If this goes public, it won't just be Homeowner Association drama. It'll be a full-scale corruption case." I exhaled, gripping the drive. "How airtight is it?" "Enough to get serious attention. We just need to get it into the right hands." Linda was waiting for me at home. She had already packed a bag. "Danny, you know what's coming. They won't just let this slide." I nodded. "I know, but we're too far in now. If we back down, we lose everything." The next morning, we went nuclear. Alex's article hit every major local outlet. A deep dive into Karen's illegal dealings, the Homeowner Association's corruption, and their connection to the mayor's office. We made it impossible to ignore. Within hours, the city was in an uproar. Karen tried to deny everything, calling it fabricated lies from a disgruntled business owner. But the evidence spoke for itself. More victims came forward. Other business owners who had been forced out. Residents who had been bullied into silence. Then, the real hit came. The state attorney's office announced a formal investigation. Karen was forced to resign. The mayor distanced himself, but it was too late. The entire Homeowner Association board was exposed for their involvement. But they didn't go down without a fight. The next week was pure chaos. Anonymous threats flooded my inbox. My car's tires were slashed outside my home. Calls came in at all hours. People breathing into the phone before hanging up. It was psychological warfare. They wanted to break me before the investigation could even begin. But they underestimated how much I was willing to endure. Neighbors started forming a kind of makeshift security network, keeping an eye on my store, my home, and my family. Some of them had been silent victims of the Homeowner Association for years, but now that the power was shifting, they weren't afraid to stand up. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was all of ours. Richard worked day and night to ensure our case was airtight. He coordinated with the press, the investigators, and the community. The city council was forced to hold an emergency meeting, and for the first time, the public was allowed to voice their concerns. The turnout was massive. People came forward with horror stories, homes taken from under them, fraudulent fees, intimidation tactics. It was damning. Karen was subpoenaed. The mayor's office issued a public statement, trying to distance themselves from the entire debacle. But it was too late. The walls were closing in on them. Then came the final blow. A whistleblower from within the city's redevelopment committee stepped forward. They provided emails and recordings proving that Karen had worked with officials to push out independent businesses, using zoning laws and fabricated violations as weapons. The case was no longer just about corruption. It was about conspiracy and fraud on a citywide scale. The moment that evidence hit the news, everything changed. Karen was arrested. The mayor announced he wouldn't seek re-election. The Homeowner Association board was dissolved. And just like that, the entire empire they had built over the years crumbled into dust. A week later, I stood in front of my store as the final paperwork cleared. The redevelopment order was overturned. My business was safe. Neighbors gathered around, congratulating me, thanking me. I had won, but it wasn't just my victory. It was a win for everyone they had tried to steamroll. As the celebration died down, I found an envelope taped to my front door. No name, just a short note inside. You played your hand well, but this game isn't over. Watch your back. I folded the note, tucking it into my pocket. I wasn't naive. Corruption didn't just disappear overnight, but I had learned one thing. When you stand your ground, when you refuse to back down, even the most powerful people can fall. And I was ready for whatever came next.